Hello and welcome to Yavich Radio. If you said it, we probably thought it already. Just a little warning, a trigger warning for anyone that has been involved in an SO or SA or have any type of those strong connections. That this podcast may not be for you today. Some podcasts will be for you. So subscribe, stay tuned. But this podcast is about Staff Sergeant Mendoza, an appellant in the that is in prison right now. His case is went through the appeal process, went through the first course, went through and was affirmed of his guilt and findings, and then it went to the higher court, which is the United States Court of Appeals of the Armed Forces. We're going to be talking a little bit about the differences between the lower courts and the higher courts, just slightly today. And I just want to make a big notation for everybody to understand that intoxication can get you in trouble for rape. Okay, if that's all you're going to take from this today, take that, because it is better to do the lesser of two evils. Do not rape somebody. Okay, if you can get away from it, it's better to punch somebody than to rape them. Okay, that is the lesser of two evils. Whatever you can do to get yourself out of this situation. Okay, do not put yourself in this situation, no matter what, and no matter if you're being seduced or whatever. Do not put yourself in this situation. Try to get out of it. I know. Well, I'm being seduced. What can I do? Well, I'm telling you, if the girl is drunk, it can get you in some serious trouble. If you are drunk and she is drunk, it can get you into some serious court litigations. Okay, so you know, if if it's you and if your husband and wife are drunk, or if they drink, it can also get you into some serious problems. Okay, so I am just trying to tell you guys, for your own safety, try to have one drink a night, 3 drinks a day, whenever you choose to drink. Okay, because drink responsibly. All right, and we're going to move forward. Your bitch radio is going to be a podcast, and pretty soon it's going to be a radio show. So stay tuned for that. Once we get the radio show going, that's going to be hopefully a 3-hour show or 2-hour show, and we're going to be talking about all types of topics, not just this. This is what I like to focus on the podcast, and I like to focus on other types of things, such as self-improvement and empowering, and social conform, or social construct conform. Something that I feel like we actually need. So, sit back, relax, go ahead and grab your favorite drink, and pause the video and come back, because this is going to be the most interesting podcast that you have ever heard. How to be professional. In this case, professionalism is one of the attributes that was missing um, while socializing. They put aside their professionalism. She went drunk, alcohol off base, came back on base, and he was socializing with his friends at the barracks, while apparently she started to kiss him on the neck and whisper in his ear. And he initially pulled away from her, but then, overwhelmed with passion, he decided to uh, engage and bring her to her room, to his room. And they were both stationed at Camp Casey, Korea. And we'll get right into the uh, his testimony. But first, we're going to talk about some of the things that went wrong for him in his trial. When he was confronted by the quarterdeck and asked what happened, he said nothing was happened. She locked herself in the bathroom. And when he was confronted with Special Agent Williams of the Army Criminal Investigation Services, he said that he did not have sexual relationships with her. Those two statements may contribute to his appeal, and may contribute to, if they have a rehearing, his ultimate conviction. But that's the factor that I don't know, that I'm actually wanting to know, is if he was actually drinking. Because if he was drinking, it will make sense. If not, then it seems like he was being defensive. There is some evidence that points to that she was wearing a tampon that was inserted the day prior, but it actually suggests that she was not wearing a tampon, that she was wearing a pad, and we will point that out. So my source is the Court of Appeals of the Armed Forces, and this is part of the appeal that I blew up and highlighted, so that we can talk about it for a little bit, because his defense rests solely on his written confession, not what he was telling other people. Um, it, it does say in the appeal that he was socializing. It doesn't give an amount that he was drinking, or any test of his blood level that we would know if how intoxicated he was. It does say that he got a beer, so it implies that he at least had one beer. But we don't know how much he was drinking prior to that. It might be in the record of the court, though they did not mention it in the appeal, and it wasn't a factor. So that's something that I'm curious in, is how much he was drinking that night, because that could explain why he said nothing happened, and why he admitted having not having sexual relationships with her. But he only admitted that JW was extremely intoxicated, so it kind of suggests that he was more on the sober mind. She leaned in and was whispering in his ear and kissing his neck, and he pulled away initially. So he gave in, overwhelmed with emotions, and ignored all signs of his own words, warning Sergeant RC that she was intoxicated. So he told somebody else that he was intoxicated, but he invited her down to his room, and she followed. And in the process, he groped her groin and thigh in the hallway. When they came into his room, she initially sat on the bed, and he was on the couch. After a bit of conversation, he got up, got a beer, and they kissed. While kissing, he asked her, "Is this okay?" She replied, "Show me what you got." So maybe his defense is still kicking in. Um, that's a problem when you initially lie, or it is not forthcoming with the truth, with saying I don't know what happened. You know, uh, Whenever you assert something, it questions your credibility. But we will talk about credibility of JW too. So the after talking with after giving his written statement, he does say in his written statement that she went into the bathroom, and he knocked on the door asking if she was okay, twice. Both times she said she was okay. She opened up the door a second time and fell back onto the toilet, and I had to help her up, and then fell back down again, and I had to help her up out of the bathroom and onto my sink. So, or the Army Criminal Investigation, ACIS, or ACID, they asked a series of specific questions, and the appellant admitted to JW was overly intoxicated, that she was not capable of giving consent when they had sex, and that he knew it was wrong to conduct sex acts on SPC when she was incapable of giving consent. That is where I remind you that the government did not charge him with the specific Article 120 that has to do with incapacitating to the point of not being able to have sex due to drugs, alcohol, or other mind-altering substances. So, if we say that maybe she didn't say show me what you got, and we both begin to remove clothing individually, and I proceeded to lie down on the bed, she proceeded to give him oral sex. If that actually happened like that, well, then the government's going to have a tough time proving that that he had known consent at the time of the sex. Yes, he absolutely said, if you charge me with the offense, or the offense and the, I would say, liability of sleeping with an incapacitated girl, well, intoxicated girl, I should say, then I would be found guilty. But that's not what happened here. So it carries with it a different sentence. It carries with it a different type of registration. The one that they have him convicted on is could be a much higher, much higher timeline with how many years you have to report as a registered sex offender. So, he's basically fighting on a technicality here. That, the only way to convict him is if, you convict him on the article that she was overly intoxicated. And you have to admit, it takes a little bit of courage to actually speak about this with with the ACID. And not all the time does AC or these criminal investigation services actually will give you your written statement or even talk about what you talk to them about, unless it actually helps the case of the government. So I picked this picture from Pexel specifically because, I was under the uninsurance that he was drinking or what have you. But if he was drinking, and you can only imagine what that would look like if someone would whisper in his ear, or even if he was sober, what would it look like if attractive woman was whispering in his ear and kissing his neck. It will wake him from his slumber. He might be overwhelmed with passion. So I just want you to think, and put yourself in the shoes of Sergeant Mendoza, or Staff Sergeant Mendoza, because, Staff Sergeant Mendoza is a man just like anybody else, and the behavior of of JW clearly allowed him to be able to put her in a vulnerable situation where they both were consenting at some point while in the hallway. She did not get offended that he was touching her groin, but and again she said she was completely blacked out. So she wouldn't really know if she said "show me what you got" or not. Um, these type of these type of things you should protect yourself from. For you should practice 1 drink an hour, 3 drinks a night. It's a very good practice when you're out drinking, so you don't make any mistakes, and you don't get yourself into a bad situation, that puts somebody in jail and makes them a registered sex offender while you're able to collect. And I'm not saying that this is a motive for this case, but it is common knowledge around the military that military sexual trauma, highest VA disability that they can get is 100%. That would mean that it's around roughly $3,854 as of this year. It can go really high. It can go 4,000. It can go, and that's for the rest of your life, every month. And yes, you can still work while being being disabled and collecting money. So uh, it's not exactly unfounded that service members make up allegations against other service members or other people for the sole purpose of collecting benefits. Clearly, if you look, maybe 2 8% could in fact be motivating. I didn't see them, uh, talk about any evidence of collecting phones or looking at search histories or any type or seeking any type of information that might be helpful uh, to the appellant in his case that can point that she had motive. But if she was just trying to figure out what happened that night, um, and it led to her talking to her friend and finding out what was going on, trying to piece it all back together, trying to find out who the appellant was. Truthfully, that's a sad story. You know, I don't know. I would probably recommend that she doesn't even consider drinking socially outside. If she was going to drink, I suggest stay at home where you're safe, and so that she doesn't have to relive a second experience like this. Because honestly, I don't know. Wasn't there. I wasn't on the jury. I don't know exactly what happened, but I can say that it was, if it is even true that she was kissing his neck and whispering in his ear, that is a that can be a very unfair thing to do to somebody. Whether or not, I mean, if there is any truth to that, then you might say there's truth to her saying, "Show me what you got," and undressing individually, and them being together. Now it says that after she has done that, he knocked on the door, and she didn't recognize him, and he knocked on the door again, and she went into the bathroom. I'm not sure if she like told him to go away or whatever, but she went into the bathroom where she realized her tampon was pushed up, and she started to panic. While she uh, while she was panicking, she went down to the quarterdeck, and while she was waiting to be taken to a medical clinic, she went to her friend, specialist RL, to ask what had happened the night before. And RL testified that JW was upset, crying, and confused when they spoke. After JW left for the clinic, Specialist RL and his NCO spoke to the appellant after hearing reports of interactions with JW that previous night. Appellant told SPCRL, which is specialist. A specialist is I think an E3 or E4 in the Army. And the NCO that JW has fallen asleep in his bed. During their conversation, JW called Specialist RL and handed the phone to the appellant. JW asked the appellant what happened, and he replied that nothing happened, that she locked herself in the bathroom. And the appellant then requested to accompany Specialist RL and the NCO to the clinic to see JW. So, if you really look at it, the JW and the appellant talked after that. Specialist RL had his number. So, when she asked what happened, he said nothing happened, and he locked himself in the bathroom. Maybe that's why I think that he was being defensive, is that, he, they were just, I don't know, he was just being defensive. I don't think that, maybe he should have been more forthcoming as to them having intercourse at that time. Maybe it was a shock to her when the presence of semen matching the appellant DNA was confirmed, and that she just really didn't know what happened. So all of these factors really tie into attacking the assumption of presumption of innocence. Guaranteed by the Constitution. It really does. And then he made yet another damning statement that he admitted that he was in control the whole time during intercourse. However, he never admitted that JW verbally or physically withheld consent. So, the damning statement is, just how it sounds. I was in control the whole time during intercourse. That doesn't sound well. It doesn't bode well for you in court. It's a statement that is conjunctive with saying that she was overly intoxicated and that he had to control the situation. And, something that he didn't relinquish when she asked what happened to him. So I really feel for JW. I really do. I feel like she might have been put into a bad situation, even though she may have flirted a little bit and allowed certain things to happen. I feel bad that she has a condition where she gets blacked out and she doesn't remember. That's not a very positive condition to have. It's not the first time that I have heard about blacked out drunk. They teach it inside of the programs of the military. They teach that you can get blacked out and not remember stuff. So that's another aspect of it, is that could JW actually have known about being blacked out and used it to her advantage? So I still look at this statement, was in control the whole time during intercourse. I look at that and I say, man, that's a wild thing to say. And so JW went to the bathroom and realized something was wrong. JW noticed that she was not wearing underwear, and she had been wearing the night before, and that her tampon was pushed all the way inside her to the extent that she could not reach the string. I want you to take note that she said that she wasn't wearing underwear, and that that she was wearing the night before, and her tampon was pushed all the way up inside. Because that's an important. Whenever you're dealing with a he said she said case, it's a very important notion to pay attention to the testimony. If the testimony has contradictions at all or anything, because it's much easier to find contradictions in the appellate story versus the contradictions in the alleged victim story. In this case, she is a victim. She was found to be a victim by the court, but it was actually this higher court, the Court of Criminal Appeals of the Armed Forces, actually said that it has to be reviewed based off of legal sufficiency, based off of a due process error that was given, and also the military judge who was sitting over that trial's opinion. It did not help. Or confine that in the article of the 120 that was charged. And during trial, JW admitted that the sports bra and underwear she has been wearing the previous night were located on the floor of her room. JW testimony also, and see, this is where I just get lost in it. He invites her to his room, but yet she's at her room. I actually think that everything happened in her room, which would make sense as why he would knock on the door. But maybe I just misread it like the 10 times and 11 times I went over this. I had actually been working on this for a very long time and reading this, and maybe I'm just missing something here. But JW also suggested that she been wearing a pad rather than a tampon on the night of the assault, because she described the photo showing her underwear as, "This is the photo of the underwear I was wearing with the pad I had been wearing." JW also admitted that she could not recall when she put her tampon in, claiming it would have been the day prior, which suggests it happening during the period of time for which she has no memory. This is the strongest defense that the appellant is going to be able to present, should he have a new trial, or should the Court of Appeals of the Army look at it, and they're probably going to do some type of verbal arguments, whereas that would mean that the appellant's appeals lawyer, will go into the Court of Appeals of the Armed Forces, and he'll have 60 minutes to be able to say his side of the story, why they should overturn it, and why, what is the legal sufficiency of it that they are arguing against. And after that, the appellant, which is Staff Sergeant Mendoza, now probably E1 in Mendoza, will have to get a copy of the oral arguments, should that be the case. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about speaking impact. It's very important whenever you're going through this type of situation that you are truthful and honest. You do not need to speak to NCIS or ACID or any of the criminal investigations. You do not need to speak to your chain of command. You do not need to speak to anybody. That is something that the only person that you should probably speak to is the person that you were with. It's a personal relationship now. And as he did talk to her, she said that, he said nothing happened. And that wasn't the case, and that was used against him in court. So everything that he said and all his cooperation was before they gave him legal counsel. If you are ever accused of a crime or anything like that, you should weigh the pros and cons. Are you prepared to take full responsibility? If so, then I suggest you just go and fall on the sword, tell the truth, because I don't think it's right to lie. I really don't. If you're trying to beat the system or anything, well, I have news for you. It's very unlikely that you're going to beat the system. However, if you want to maintain hope that you can do a crime and be found innocent of it, well, that's you should probably consult a lawyer right away. And if you are innocent and you find that you feel at any time that the investigator, and you are trying to communicate to the investigators, and you find out that you give them your phone and everything that they're asking for, and that they say that they got the information, which is true, they do that sometimes, and that they took a copy of your phone, but then they don't submit it to the courts, and because it doesn't help their case. So sometimes talking to them is just wasting your own breath. Lying hurts your credibility, but it's a tactic, and it's something that all police officers can do. They can lie to you. They can say that, hey, look, we took your cell phone. We're going to go ahead and review it. We're going to look at the text messages, everything that's about it, and that is about as far as it will go. And I want to say on a second point, if you're ever in a situation where you have to think twice about doing something, just don't do it. Just it was probably better if he punched her in the face, honestly, versus being caught with a sexual offense. You know, it's like, no, get off me, just punch her. You know, honestly, it would have been better for both of them. You know, she wouldn't have to be subjugated to a rape allegation, and her character and her motives be questioned by the likes of me or by anybody or by jury or by anyone. It would have just been a simple fact. You punched her in the face, you know, and then you went and you lost your career over it. But I'm sure he would have preferred losing his career over having to register for the rest of his life as a sex offender. You know, they say the Catholic Church says to take the lesser of two evils. Okay, and I just think that, honestly, look, if you didn't want to punch her, you could have punched that friend of his that you told she was too overly intoxicated to or whatever, and for not getting you away from the situation. Service members, they do fight. And honestly, it would have been better if that situation ended up with somebody stopping him. Let the quarter, if she's too incapacitated to walk or whatever, stumbling, let the quarter deck deal with it. And the fact of the matter is, she walked right by the quarter deck and everything, and everything, and they didn't notice anything. They have cameras, they didn't notice the cameras. They didn't knock on the door, they didn't do their rounds. So as far as a military sexual trauma being for 100%, obviously it's for a good reason, because the security and everything that was at Camp Casey, Korea, was too lax. They weren't focusing on their job. They knew that she was at least on the camera that was walking. They say CCTV, but we all know that it was a barracks camera, and they do record the cameras and they have access to the feeds. They weren't watching it. They were not doing their job at the time. So, we look at it and say that it's a failure of defense. So she is entitled to a disability because it's service connected. It was preventable, and nobody, it doesn't say if she has a roommate or not, but nobody thought about her at all until she went and she had to get upset. And we're going to talk real fast about the consequences of procedural misconduct. Um, and not charging the appellant appropriately to what you thought you could prove. You wanted to use a mixture of intoxication and lack of consent to be able to prove it, but there's no way that she would have been able to remember if she was able to consent. The only way to charge him would have been through the intoxication standard, but they felt that they had a strong enough case because he lied, and was able to prove him at a higher standard of liability under Article 120, which would have just made his life a little bit harder, longer having to register, because there's like different tiers of registration for a sex offender for as long as they have to, and and the incapacitated one is a lower tier, I believe, and the removal of consent on sober minds is a higher one. And they said, nevertheless, we agree that the appellant has some of the government's arguments at trial raised significant due process concerns about his conviction. They presented an expert testimony that the alcohol level was between 0.175 and 0.19, and that the sexual act and the opinion of JW would have been diminished mental capacity. They pointed at the testimony of multiple witnesses saying everyone who had interaction with JW knew that she was too intoxicated to function that night, and that their testimony confirmed that JW met the definition of an incompetent person before the accused took her into the courtroom or took her to his room. See, that's where I get confused, because it says his and then it says her room. It's very confusing, these appeals, as to the timeline and what actually happened. But apparently, they, I believe that she went to his room first, and then her room, or his room. I just don't know. But she was just moving everywhere like a hot potato. Uh, they argued that the barrack CCTV footage showed that when JW went to the appellant's room. Alright, was completely out of it. She was stumbling, walking into walls, bumping into objects, and she had no idea what was going on here. And pointed to the appellant's own statements, and the appellant admitted that JW was really drunk and that she was not able to give consent. So, I believe that Staff Sergeant Mendoza at least tried to, tell them that, hey, look, I had consent, but yet she was not able to give consent because she was drunk, and I understand that, I realize that, and so do with me what you will. He basically fell on his sword. I don't think that he, after saying stuff like that he really had anything to hide. Because what's the difference between saying that, I raped her, or I really raped her? What's the difference? So is it likely that she said that his written statement was correct? You know, it's just one of those things that actually strengthens his written statement of his confession, and the government's going to have a really hard time if they try to charge him off of the standard that she was really drunk, or try to switch sides, because on the one side, if they don't try him again, he's going to just say, hey, look, I confessed to the alcohol that that it was a contributing factor that she couldn't consent, but yet on a sober, if she was sober, she would have consented. It's going to be a very interesting, interesting next year for Staff Sergeant Mendoza, should this case get overturned. The government arguments before the court also made it clear that the government presented this evidence, and therefore there was absence of consent. But as we explained above, there's a different theory of criminal liability and a different offense that won the government charge. Under the actual charge offense article 120B2A UCMJ, it's not clear evidence of JW's intoxication factored into either decision of the military judge or the opinion of the ACCA. So it's not clear how the evidence of JW's intoxication factor into it, either decision of the military judge or the opinion of the ACCA. But it did, because it goes into saying upholding the factual that the ACCA similarly. Well, we'll just go through the whole thing. With respect to the military judge, the government states whether Miss JW was completely incapacitated by alcohol or whether she was merely intoxicated to the point of her resistance was significant, reduced, was a question of fact properly before the military judge for consideration, but nothing in the record indicates that the military judge found that JW was capable of consenting but did not, or that JW was incapable of consenting and thus could not. Similarly, in upholding the factual sufficiency of the appellant's conviction, the ACCA relied on several factors, including the victim's high level of intoxication, which was, again, a different article in the 120, and they could not do that. And thus, we have something that the higher court went against the lower court, because honestly, just a little breakdown, the lower court is a bunch of military people. The higher court, the CAF, is civilian judges. So these civilians caught this problem and said, hey, look, you have a real problem. No. When I said, your problem is that, though you may believe that he is found guilty, you pointed to that it was because of the high level of intoxication. You can't do that based off of the charges of the charging of the appellant, which is Staff Sergeant Mendoza. And we actually feel like his whole trial has a big ticking time bomb in it. So perhaps during his trial, we'll see what happens. But he has a very interesting year and two ahead of him. Um, they point out that the evidence includes JW had no prior relationship with the appellant. That was what we talk about, one night stands. They happen in America. My first time when I was a teenager was a first night stand. She came to my room and she basically said that, she was introduced by my brother, and I thought she was very beautiful and everything, and I was just like, I fell in love with her right away. And, when I went to go visit her at her job, she was like, no, I'm not interested in you. I was like, what? How sad is that? So anyway, but I'm not going to go ahead and say that we didn't have consensual sex, but some people would. Some people would say you raped me. All right, so that's a certain possibility you have to watch out for. So I would only say testimony that JW had no prior relationships with the appellant could be a triggering effect of both sides. Both sides. Testimony that JW would never have sex on her period. That's a bit of a problem for the defense to get over, or the appellant to be able to breach, because I believe that she had a principle there, and when you have a principle, though it's not set in stone, I believe that it's a factor that you have to hurdle. A testimony that JW would never have pushed the tampon in so far herself. I don't know. That is evidence, but there's contradictory evidence of her testimony. So they're at least they're being fair that this is the evidence that they include. Testimony that JW was made a morning after report to the quarterdeck after she realized something was wrong. That as far as this becomes a chain. If she was wearing a pad, and then it contaminates 3, contaminates 4, which contaminates 5, which contaminates 6, which is 5 is the testimony that JW was upset. 6 was the testimony that initially denied that he had engaged in sexual acts with JW. It contaminates it, but maybe not 6. But 3, 4, and 5 are certainly contaminated. 6. I just don't know. I don't know if he was drinking. I don't know the facts around the case enough to point out or to say why he initially denied it. Maybe because he thought that they wouldn't know if he had sex with her or not. I don't know how they teach the military so graphically about about these types of things. I don't know how, but he in his mind, maybe he denied having sexual relationships with that woman because that's a hurdle that the defense is going to have to get over. Why did he deny it? But again, he wasn't under oath. He wasn't. But you're not supposed to lie to law enforcement, so it's a very hard hurdle over. Maybe he was just scared and he got defensive. There's people that lie to law enforcement and then they go to jail, which is what happened here. So that testimony or number 6 is the biggest thing that's going to get him, that got him locked up, honestly. And testimony that JW locked herself in the appellate's bathroom. I don't know. He said that she opened up the door twice for him. I don't know. So 6 and 7 are the strongest ones. 1 is is kind of a gray area. 2, 3, or 2 is a is an affirmation that she if she was thinking clearly and not drunk, she would not have had sex on her period. And 3, 4, and 5, are kind of are kind of contaminated by her own testimony in court that she was wearing a pad, as evidence suggests. But as again, I say that women do wear tampons and pads. So I don't know. I don't know why the court would not, or the lawyers didn't do a better job of saying, were you wearing, were you? Maybe she just thought that people would assume that she was wearing a tampon and a pad, which is completely logical. Okay, so I think what Staff Sergeant Mendoza is fighting for here is actually not that he'll get off with a sexual offense, which he would love to get off of a sexual offense right now. He would. He would love to get off of it, but he's fighting for the the liability that comes with a lesser sex offense. You know, honestly, I'm sure maybe maybe he'll have a new trial and then they will reverse it. But let me tell you, when they get a new trial, the conviction that he has in this trial is going to be the baseline for how much that he can sentence him, and he's not going to get any higher than what he has already. Okay, and I just want to thank you guys for tuning in to Yavitch Radio. If you said it, we probably thought of it already. Please like the video, share, and subscribe. Alright? Thank you, my brainiacs. Pinkies up.